Holly Walker.
Apologies to my colleague, but I also would like to take a call on part two to address some of the contributions made by Alfred Ngaro, because like him, I have been involved in the Select Committee on this particular matter for some time, starting with the inquiry into the 2011 general election. And as Mr Ngaro will recall, we spent a long time on that inquiry, some would say perhaps too long. There was at one point a question mark about whether there would even be time for this electoral amendment bill to come before the House and to be passed in time to put its provisions in place for this year's election, because we took so long over the 2011 general election inquiry. But I'm not ashamed of the fact that we took a long time on that inquiry, Mr Chairman, because it was a very robust process and we reached consensus and we worked very hard to do that. And I was proud of my work on that inquiry. It was my first experience of real, genuine cross-party collaboration on a Select Committee item of business where we got, I think, a really positive result. One of the outcomes of that process was the recommendation that changes be made to the use of the Easy Vote card to include on it a scannable code so that it can be used as a record that a vote had been cast in the election. And that was what we went around in circles actually about that for a while during the election inquiry, because there was concern about the potential for voter fraud. And we heard from submitters who had that concern, we heard from members of the committee who had that concern, and we heard from the Electoral Commission who gave us evidence about why that concern was unfounded. And we listened and we concluded that it was an unfounded concern and that we could include a recommendation to allow the Easy Vote card to be used in this way. So we did, and that's what appeared in the first draft of this legislation. And so as we now debate part two and the consequential amendments to what has just passed by a very slim majority in part one, I think it's important that we consider why it is that we have departed so far from the original draft of the bill, which was what the Minister brought to this House and which was what the Select Committee recommended after its inquiry into the 2011 election. Now, I wasn't present for the Select Committee discussions on this bill. I would venture to say if I had been, I may have made these arguments in person in the discussions. Unfortunately, I was on parental leave and I couldn't do that. But, Mr Chairman, the same arguments that applied when we were talking about the election inquiry, about the Easy Vote card, apply to this bill. Those concerns that may well have been raised by members of the committee during the discussion of this bill about the potential for increased electoral fraud are simply unfounded. From a user perspective, from a voter perspective, going along to cast their vote in the 2014 election on the 20th of September this year, there will be no difference if the bill as originally drafted were to pass. Their use of the Easy Vote card would not change. It would not make it easier for them to use the card. It would not make them more likely to commit fraud. It would not make them less likely to commit fraud. There would be no difference. They would simply take the Easy Vote card along to the polling booth, present it to the polling place staff member and get their voting papers. And so those concerns that somehow there is an increased chance of fraud taking place from this are simply unfounded. From the user perspective, there is no difference. You get the card in the mail, you take it to the polling booth. Where the difference comes is after the vote has been cast, it allows the Electoral Commission staff to scan it so that it is electronically recorded against the electoral roll. That's the difference. And that is what we have inexplicably deleted from this bill, and which has broken down the consensus that was achieved over a very long period of time when the committee originally considered these items in its 2011 election inquiry. And I think that is a real shame, because all it is doing is making it more difficult for the Electoral Commission to do their job on election day, and it is missing the opportunity to streamline electoral processes and to actually continue to modernise and update our electoral law. Now, there are a number of consequential amendments in part two that stem from what we have debated in part one. And again, we'll support those because we do generally support the tenor of this legislation, and we supported all of the recommendations that originally prompted this bill. And we were very excited about modernising our electoral law. And so it's a great shame that some unfounded concern about voter fraud, which if you take a cynical view, as my colleague Mr Lees Galloway has, may be prompted by overseas developments, but it's a real shame.
Chris Farfoy.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. It's a pleasure to take a call on part 2 of the electoral